So we've already covered this topic earlier in the year when we did a little bit of writing around intros, but it's always important to loop back because writing good, strong introductions set us up for having a really strong, well-written essay. And having a really strong introduction does a lot of things. It gets the reader's attention and pulls the reader in. It sets the structure for how you're going to write the paper. It establishes your main idea and it gives the reader a little bit of background about what your paper is going to be about. So that introductions are really important that we do them well and that we follow the criteria. So if you remember back, and I know it was a while ago, but if you remember back, we were teaching and learning about what we call the ABCs of introduction. So it's kind of a formula. And if you think about it as a formula, that you do A first, then B, then C. That'll help you kind of understand how to write introductions. So the first thing you need, the A, is an attention-getting hook, or some teachers may call it a lead. You need to start with something that grabs the reader's attention. So these are some different ways that you can start an essay. So very often you have people start an essay with a quote from a famous person or from a book. You may have them talk about how someone may be misunderstanding something. You may have them start with a story, which is an anecdote, is another word for a story. Although I'll tell you, that can backfire very easily. So I don't normally advise my students to start with a personal story or anecdote. But as you get to be better writers, you can do that. Sometimes you want to start with a shocking piece of data or a number fact. And when we wrote our essays earlier this year, we started with a question. Or you might start with a fact or a definition. You know, love is defined as this. Friendship is defined as this. And all these are different ways to start an essay. So the A is that you want an attention-getting hook. You want to pull your reader in. And then as you're writing, okay, you're moving on. That's your hook, all right? Then as you're moving on, you want to give a little bit more information about your topic, and that's the B, the background. So you want to talk a little bit about what it is that you're going to be discussing in this paper. So if it's a book, the reader may not have read the book, so you might want to give a little bit of background information about the book. If it's something in history class, they may not know about what happened in history, so you might want to give some information about that. And then finally, the C is your claim. And another word for claim is your thesis. So essentially, the ABCs of introduction is A, an attention-getting hook, B, a bit of background knowledge about your topic, and C, your claim or thesis. And we know to come up with our claim or thesis, we use the strategy that we used and learned earlier this year called TTQA. So all of these things sort of work together. For this essay, when we're doing our compare-contrast, we're going to really focus on using a quote. Okay, so we're going to work on using a quote. I have a list of collection, a slide deck of quotes around the idea of growing up or adolescence. So our essay prompt is to compare, contrast how Rachel in 11 and how the poet in On Turning 10, how they feel similarly and differently about growing up and what those similarities and differences are. So I thought this would be a great essay for us to use a quote around adolescence, which is another word for teenage years, or growing up, okay? But this slide that you're looking at right now is going to give you some different ways that you can start with a quote. So there are different things that you can do. You can start by having the quote and then giving a little bit of a sentence around it. You can start by giving, you know, where the quote came from, you know, according to Walt Disney blank. Or you can give the quote and then afterwards tell who said it. So 3 different ways, starting with the quote and then a little bit of explanation about the quote, start with who said it and then give the quote, or give the quote and then say who said it. So these are all different ways that you can use a quotation or a line that was said by a famous person in order to start your paper and hook your reader. So on the next slide, you're going to see a series of different quotes from famous people. What I want you to do is I want you to look through those quotes by famous people, and I want you to choose one of them. Choose a quote that stands out to you. I want you to choose it, okay? And I want you to write it down. You can write it down on a piece of spare paper. You can write it down on a Post-it. You can write it down wherever you want to write it down. But I want you to write that quote down. And then after you write that quote down, you're going to go on to the next slide. And in the next slide, what it's going to ask you to do is it's going to ask you to use one of these 3 formulas to write your quote. So again, write the quote and then give a sentence of explanation about the quote, introduce the speaker and then give the quote, or give the quote and then say who said it. Any of these will work, and we are going to use a quotation for our hook, or our attention-getting hook for this particular essay. So feel free at this time to go on to the next slide on your Nearpod, and again, have that pen and paper ready for when you find the quote that you want, write it down. And again, the slide deck, you can look at it a number of times and go back to the quote a few times if you need to. So don't choose on the first slide. Look at them all before you make your suggestions, or your choices rather. All right, and as usual, if you have any questions, let me know.